Hi, everyone. I'm Jim. I'm obviously joined by my colleague Gaisha here, and yeah, we're just gonna take you through ways that economic modeling, particularly our socioeconomic indicators plugin, can be used to help prioritize projects in the context of government after the pandemic. All right, so yeah, hello everyone. I'm Jim. I believe Dee already introduced me, but I'll just say my email's right down there in the slides. If you have any questions that you want to ask me afterwards, you're free to email me there. And Gaisha, if you want to.
Oh, I was going to say the same thing with me. My email is there as well. So if you all have any questions that you'd like to ask me as well, feel free to email me there. And I'm going to hand it back over to Jim.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, just heading up. This is a brief structural overview of how the presentation is going to go. First off, we're going to introduce ourselves as a company and our background and some customers we have, and then we'll go through the topic. Then we'll just flow from there. So a little bit of background about REMI. We are the nation's leading provider of dynamic local, state, and federal economic policy modeling solutions. Since 1980, we have sought to improve the public policy decision-making process through economic modeling, and we provide that in the form of both a user-friendly software application and our consulting services, and that it helps inform policies that affect all of our lives, and we really are just inspired by the goal of improving public policy. So here are just a few of the clients that we've had in the past, and some of whom we continue to work with. So this is just a representative sample. Obviously, we have many more, but you can see we have clients ranging from consultancy firms to sort of political interest groups, universities, intergovernmental organizations, and state agencies. Particularly, state agencies are a large sort of portion of our customer base. All right, so I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of an overview of the topic at hand and how we're going to approach it in this webinar. So this is one of the initiatives that we're going to be looking at project prioritization through the lens of. The Justice 40 initiative is an initiative meant to tackle the climate crisis while sustaining job creation and sort of promoting social equity and sort of restoring evidence-based policymaking across the governance profession. It wants to catalyze the creation of jobs across various industrial sectors, creating new green infrastructure and associated products. Wants to revitalize communities by both appropriating funds and starting initiatives to help communities that might have displaced workers from the transition away from fossil fuels, and it will help transition those people, or aims to help transition those people into jobs in the clean energy economy, and it wants to support environmental justice and create more economic opportunity by sort of addressing the impacts of climate change on disadvantaged groups. So here's a quick matrix of different types of projects that you might see coming across one's desks in a project prioritization scenario. Obviously, you have a trade-off between value returned and effort or resources put in, and some of them are going to be shoe-ins that are high-value, low-effort projects that you'll obviously want to prioritize resources towards. You have the ones you obviously don't want to prioritize at all. Those are the low-value, large effort. But in situations where you're looking at more complicated questions, like a project that has the potential to return a lot of value but also requires a lot of effort, or one that doesn't require much effort but also doesn't deliver much value, that's where you can where you might need to have very tough conversations about project prioritization, and that's really where we think we come in effectively in those situations where there's like difficult choices and tough policy questions. So here's a timeline of policy prioritization, and we're just looking to demonstrate how economic modeling can fit into this, and it show how it enables organizations to redirect investments to the projects that have the highest return and keep their region competitive over the long run. And they can do this through examining various socioeconomic indicators that our model can give insight into. So I'm going to hand this over to Gaisha to talk us through the case study and methodology of the webinar today.
Thank you, Jim, for giving us some context on the subject. So as he said, I'm just going to hop right into the case study portion of this presentation. So for this particular case study, we decided to target Los Angeles, California, and as well as to present you all with some potential economic development projects that are coming down the pipeline of Council of Governments, metro planning organizations, and just regional planning organizations in general. Like these are high priority things in which they've been prioritizing. But just to kind of give you all a preview of the model's capabilities, as Jim said, through how it allows for organizations to gain insights by attaching numbers to, to like the decision making. We decided to choose, number one was the transportation electrification partnership, and as well as broadband access expansion. So both of these do have focal areas in infrastructure. The only stark differences are going to be one is more so focused more so towards transportation, and the other is for human capital. And of course they plan. Well, and of course, like their goals are to not only affect climate change, but as well as to, in a sense, bridge the gap of connectivity, whether that is building infrastructure to support the use of electric vehicles, or either that's through increasing internet access. And then so the big question in which that we aim to do, the big question in which that we aim to answer here, and as well as to show you all, is that what role does socioeconomic sustainability and as well as resilience mean in the long run? In the long run, especially when these organizations have limited resources. So it's important to understand, not only how are these things benefiting a region economically, but as well as who is also benefiting, and is it just for one group or is it for all? And so the next part of our presentation is going to be explaining to you all our methodology. So our methodology, what we decided to use was our premier module add-on, which is going to be our REMI socioeconomic indicators, or rather the short version for SCI. So what this module gives you the ability to do is that you get a preview into the distributional effects of your human capital. So that includes viewing the jobs, viewing the different industries and as well as occupations and how they affect different races and as well as genders, as well as your labor force participation, your educational attainment levels, and as well as your income by different quintiles. And so this really gives you, as I said before, the value add of starting a conversation of how are these different policies impacting disadvantaged communities, as the Justice 40 initiative aims to help. And then so the software underlying the module add-on of SCI is going to be Transite. And then so what this helps organizations do is to understand the transportation impacts on, understand how transportation impacts the economy. And then so that's just going to give you previews into how output variables such as labor access and as well as commodity access were improved based upon the construction of a new highway and things of that nature. And so just to give you all some of the variables in which that were used for this particular methodology, they were divided into 3 different sections. So for the broadband access expansion, the first thing which is you're going to know, oh, well, before we get into the 3 different sections, I didn't want to give you all a quick Model T up because it will not be a live demonstration. So these numbers were forecasted from 2022 until 2040, so we could really get a gauge into some short run as well as long run effects of these policies. The region was Los Angeles County, and it was a 70 sector industry model with SCI enabled. And so the variables that were used for the business costs were production costs and as well as intermediate demand. The production cost was actually input as a negative number. And another quick caveat about the simulation is that all the numbers used were dummy variables, just to more so gauge the impact, but not the, I guess, like the absolute value of things. So, and then the intermediate demand was put in as a positive, because the assumption was that as you're increasing access to internet, you're also increasing the demand for the particular facets of that supply chain. And then the next portion of this is going to be for the commodity access index and as well as consumer price, which were both put in as percents. And in particularly, the consumer price was put in as a negative for the simple reasons that since we're increasing access, it's going to decrease the price. Then commodity access was put in as a positive percentage. Since people, I'm sorry, no, both of those were put in as negatives. Sorry. And then the non-pecuniary amenities were put in as positives. And lastly, for the operations and maintenance to capture the construction of these internet towers and as well as these telecommunication companies, these were put in as positives. And lastly, the production costs associated with that was also put in as positives until 2030. And then so the next portion of our model simulation is going to be for the transportation electrification, because our goal here is to compare the results of them both. And so household finance and as well as the last portion, which for this particular side is going to be electric vehicle infrastructure, were both put in the same way, such as like with consumer price and as well as commodity access index. Being percent, and then like the only difference in this particular side is going to be your fuel costs. And then so it's assumed that because now you're building the infrastructure to support electric vehicles, this is going to cause a decrease in particularly electricity. And then so the next portion of this is going into the notable results of this particular simulation. And then to start off, these were the findings. So for the first key result we have here is going to be our employment by industry quintile. And then this is particularly for the broadband expansion project. And as we see here, that the primary industries that benefited from the broadband expansion project at the beginning until about 2030 was going to be your second 20%. But this can be explained because of the construction variable was input until 2030. So you're really incentivizing that particular industry sector, especially when it comes to job creation or what have you. But as we see that even after 2030, the employment by by the different income quintiles by industry held steady and sort of equitable in a sense. However, when we compared it to the vehicle electrification results, there's some very stark differences. And so as we can see is that the first 20% benefited the most. And then the second was going to be the second 20%. But again, that's because of the construction jobs that were input into the model. And we can also see that actually the lowest 20% after 2030 was actually, they were actually hurt the most. And then our next point of comparison is going to be when it comes to GDP output and income. And then so for the broadband expansion project, we see that the biggest gainer here is going to be for the real disposable personal income. But this is also based upon the assumption that because the production costs were lower due to bridging the digital divide, this also created, in a sense, a way for people to, to allocate their consumption elsewhere, considering the fact that, like the internet became cheaper, and of course, like the other factors that were also, input into the simulation. And as well as GDP and output held steady, of course, until after 2030, when the primary shocks were taken out. And then again, with the vehicle electrification for GDP output and income, there were some very stark differences. As we can see that although GDP as well as output were major gainers, however, with real disposable personal income, people actually suffered in a sense. And then so that could possibly be explained by the fact that although you are incentivizing electricity to be cheaper, but yet, creating the same access to labor and commodities, is not the same. Then the next thing which we have here is going to be our participation rates by race within the labor force. And then so as we can see is that white non-Hispanic gained the most. The second group they gained the most were going to be Black non-Hispanic. But of course, but after 2030, the trends were pretty consistent by like the biggest gainers and as well as in a sense like the lowest gainers in a sense, which is going to be the least, is going to be Hispanic. And then with the vehicle electrification project, although at first, as you all can see, that there was a positive % change up until 2032, but this was, but this changed in 2033, and as we can see that all groups started to leave the labor force. And then so now we get to our employment by race as well. And so as we can see is that the primary participants in the labor force starting in 2022 were primarily white non-Hispanics and as well as Hispanics, and then Black non-Hispanic and as well as Asians, Asian non-Hispanic and as well as other non-Hispanic leveled out. But as we progress steadily all the way until 2040, the biggest gainers of the employment share was going to be Black non-Hispanic and as well as white non-Hispanic. And then with vehicle electrification, the The same thing happened in 2022 as we compare, with the white non-Hispanics and as well as Hispanic groups gaining the most numbers when it came to employment. However, by 2040, white non-Hispanics came the most, and then the second players were Asian non-Hispanic and as well as other non-Hispanic. And now I will turn it over to Jim.
Great. So here we can see the key results for gender and employment for the broadband initiative. You can see at first there's a substantial difference between male and female employment. That's probably due to the initial shocks in the construction sector. And you can see that there's a difference that persists, but it tapers off, especially close to the late 2020s and early 2030s, and then it widens up a little bit, but it stays pretty close across the whole simulation. And you can see for the vehicle electrification, some very similar, but also a little bit different. You can see that males do a bit better at first, and then once the sort of initial shock wears off, you can see that females do slightly better, but it's not by a really notable amount. And they're pretty close to even in the years after 2030. All right, so here are the conclusions that we came to at the end of this. So the broadband access expansion created pretty substantial gains in GDP output in middle income industries above the baseline level. Personal disposable personal income, sorry, got a little tongue-tied there, increased pretty steadily and by a noticeable amount, although these are all pretty small amounts in the grand scheme of things, but that it is a sort of notable, and you can see that that's because of better commodity and labor access, which is improving output efficiency and decreasing prices. So it would have a positive impact in Los Angeles. This broadband initiative would do good for a broad segment of the population. The vehicle electrification initiative had low gains for GDP and output and income, and they're sort of less than half of what the improvement shown by the broadband access expansion, and it's primarily concentrated in the upper middle class, which is the fourth quintile, the fourth 20%, and there were some gains for the other groups, but it again was not as substantial, and the second quintile only really was gaining because of the construction sort of stimulative effect there. So a bit more about the importance of economic modeling and how it can support sort of comparisons like this in project prioritization and other sorts of projects. So firstly, it can help organizations clarify the implications of the policies that they're planning to implement, and to ensure that public policy serves the broadest possible sort of set of public interests. It can help to predict what will happen when a policy is implemented, so mitigation steps can be taken, or aspects of the policy can be tweaked to avoid those unintended consequences. And it can be used, as we discussed here, to help sort of optimize the deployment of resources to make sure that public monies are being deployed to the most effective areas when it comes to accomplishing the government's objectives. It also serves a very important informative role to basically inform policymakers in a standard way, so that there's universally understandable metrics by which we're judging policy decisions, so we can know what is good and what is bad, regardless of what one's ideological proclivities might be. And it can address stakeholders with evidence that can show how the policy would affect their community. So here are just a few of the applications that our software has been deployed in. We've been used in the regional greenhouse gas initiative in New England, the Maryland corporate tax rate reduction. There's statutory impact analysis, statutorily required impact analysis on all appropriations legislation in the Texas state legislature, and many more. And all of these help to create a rigorous quantitative narrative for policymakers to communicate to the public about the effects of their policies on the economy. So here's a little bit more about why economic modeling is a good solution for policymakers. It can help agencies understand the long-term and sort of future effects of the policies that they're planning on implementing. Once again, so that they can either dial things back or implement mitigation measures if there are sort of negative implications to certain policies. It can help guide the process of making policies. It can be used to create a formalized decision-making process where all policies are subjected to a uniform test so that things are judged against the same bar. You can get it right the first time. It's always better to measure twice and cut once than have to go back and change things, especially when it's public money and programs that are affecting people's lives. It can be used to pass or block legislation based on the positive or negative forecasted effects of a certain policy, and it can be used to help make agencies more efficient and sort of competitive in the 21st century environment. So policy modeling software like this can also be an invaluable tool for, or in certain cases, very precisely, with a very precise and large value to bidders for grants and contracts, because it can provide that demonstration of benefit to host communities, which is, can secure lots of funding for people who are looking to secure government contracts or grants. And policy organizations really use modeling a lot, and those who don't could use it to show rigorously how their proposed policies will affect stakeholders, and that can be used to influence decision makers. And this can be used on the other sides with policy organizations saying, that this is what someone proposes, and these are the bad effects of it, and why you shouldn't do it. So it has both sort of pass and block side utility to advocacy groups.